Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here at Data Alchemy Conference in San Mateo. I'm Kathleen Grave. I'm Senior Vice President at Dataskill. And I'll be talking today about getting started with predictive analytics.
I'm very happy to be here and talk about how to get to the meat of the matter. As we heard from Jenny, and get another perspective of it as well. It's amazing how similar some of our starting points are, and so there seems to be a consensus that this is the way, just start digging in and getting going. If you look back on predictive analytics and where it came from, everyone since the beginning of time has been doing some type of analytics. We walk around and we think about, okay, this happened today, what's going to happen tomorrow? So when you start to see the computational era looking and showing how you can program a computer to do that, when you start to think, how can we look back at the lessons we learned on all the data we've collected? Hindsight is 20/20. I shoulda, woulda, coulda, and what lessons did I learn from that? However, we need to remember that it's not what the future is going to be. You need to look at some of the environmental, ecological, and other factors, economic factors around that. So moving into insight, you use that insight to get perceptions and realizations of what's going on in the environment or economically, and then you move into gaining a different perspective through the prediction and having a competitive advantage. So if we look next here, oops, there we go back. I'm just sharing some industry domains where you can use some predictive analytics to make a real difference in your business right now. And if you look at customer insight, crime analytics, healthcare, insurance, and finance, these are some sweet spots the company I work with, Dataskill, is doing. And Dataskill is a perfect example of what we heard the speakers talking about earlier. I actually am working for IBM Watson Group, if you saw the computer on Jeopardy that won. And that is the first commercialization of the gaming capability that happened. Is now moving into industry. And what we found in Watson Group, as I was working with our channel, that the smaller companies get it much faster. They're very agile, they're flexible, and they can get to market faster, and they can get to the first solution outcome first. So IBM, we've been very successful at building the beast, and now we look at our channel partners to go out and really build these solutions and deliver them out on site. And it's been wonderful for me, a 25-year IBMer, to say, okay, it's time for me to go do something different, and then to have the opportunity to go work with one of our best partners to get these solutions to the marketplace so that they can make a difference in industry. And just a couple examples, if you look at healthcare, the clinical treatments, the diagnostics and the research coming together to give some predictions at what a patient might need as treatment or care management. That's an incredible difference from how doctors have been making decisions in the past. It does not substitute for the capability and the intellect of that doctor and the experience of that doctor. It augments them by helping them to predict. This is the medicine or the treatment or the care that needs to happen next. However, that doctor knows the patient one-on-one, and so the decision-making process is a combination of the analytics and the discussion and decision-making around the environment that patient is in. So just a little bit of the categories in case you're looking to get started on a project. Don't boil the ocean, start small. Pick an area and start to understand what does it take to look at fraud detection in the financial and insurance industry. What are some specific data points that we have? And you can't make a mistake, because if you don't choose the first data to do the analytics and start to build the predictive models on, you've learned from that so you can correct yourself and move forward. A couple of examples just to get you comfortable with it, because what I find when I go out to clients and I'm working with them is they say, oh my goodness, we have so much, we don't even know where to start, and Joe doesn't want to talk to Sarah, who doesn't want to talk to Jim, because they all own their own information, and it's kind of data silos where there's a protection of the data, and they don't understand also what they can get out of sharing it. So yes, it's very important to engage at the C levels in the company and have them understand, if you're the CMO or the CTO, what you need to do here. But as we say in IBM, and everyone has this model, is we don't sell to the CIO anymore. He's got to be one of your stakeholders, because he's the one whose job is at risk if he doesn't have the information available to help you. And if he doesn't understand your project, he will not be an advocate for your project. So while we sell the solution and the progress the sales cycle with the CMO or the CFO, we always engage at the CIO level and the statisticians or the people that are going to make a difference in the actual cycles of implementing and getting the outcomes from the projects. So on this particular use case, we were working with an insurance company, and they need to look at reducing their losses on claims and the fraud that's in their claims. So we looked at pulling together some information, and we did. We started small. We ended up with 15 data sources at the end, but we showed them, in order to map a project, pick the first 2 or 3 data points, pull those in, look at your legacy of data, where it comes from. What's the data look like? How's it going to work together? How can you build a simple model and get those outcomes? And it started to change the thinking process of the employees that were doing this and how the teams were going to engage together. So if there's someone who needed the end user report versus the person who was owning the data, they were able to talk at a very small or short level on what they needed and what they were seeing in the outcome of reports, instead of saying, now we've got 15 variables coming together, and oh my goodness, what are you going to use this for? How'd you use it? So we start small, and we help them to show how to team and work together to get an understanding, and at the same time, it helps them to brainstorm, oh, this is what we could do next. This is what we could do next. And we capture that information along the way to say, don't jump into that next one specifically, but let's keep that on the list of directions to go in the future. And we always go back to the business leader to decide, is this information more important than this information? Or you need both of them together, and how quickly? So in order to improve that, they brought the data together, and they brought together both structured and unstructured information, which is a way of identifying where some of the trigger points are for fraud. So for example, in a claim, in an insurance claim, there are certain phrases that are used that can be tested and shown, 89% of the time, that's going to be a fraudulent claim. But the company doesn't know that, and the claims adjuster doesn't know that. So if you put the technology together and start to identify that, what it comes through on the work management system and the process flow is, when it gets to that adjuster, there might be a red flag that says, go interview the claimee and have a discussion about what happened at the stop sign, and take different notes or do audio recording of that. And then we translate it to audio to text, and then we can analyze that text for deeper details. But it does give them the trigger of how they can save a lot of money by looking at the cases that are highest risk for fraud versus, settling and closing the claims that they need to move through quickly. Another one is education, just very interesting, and we're starting to use this in business as well, is in education they're looking and they're saying, who are the students that are going to have the best rate of graduating from college? And who are the employees that are going to have the best way of succeeding in business? So around the sales, as you heard in the sales use case, who are those employees that are going to come in, get trained, make a difference, do their CRM records? What is their performance level? And then the other thing that we do is we look at it and we follow and track that, and we put that back in the system, so the system learns, were we correct in predicting these were the right salespeople, these were the right behaviors, or did we see different outcomes, and we feed that back into the machine so we can adjust always for the next prediction and the benefits. And if you look at all these, there's an operational cost that is saved in getting the right employees, getting the right training, and delivering that, but there's also a strategic change that can happen, because then you don't have to spend your time looking and saying, are these the right people? You can start to say, what are we going to sell next? How are we going to go out to new markets? And so what might be operational and tactical when you're looking at predictive analytics certainly really quickly can move into a strategic discussion if you tackle the right problems. Oops. Real quick, telecommunications also, we listen to the voice of the customer. So call centers, customer sat, emails, we can combine all of that. We can combine the structured data and the unstructured data and do the analytics to understand what's coming in through the call centers, reduce the customer churn down from whether it's 17 minutes to 7 minutes, which is one of our use cases that happen. And it improves customer satisfaction at the same time, and it gives data back into the business to say, here are the next programs we should roll out, because this seems to be the area of complaints or the desires of the customer. So we listen to the voice of the customer by pulling in all the information, and then also improving the delivery system so they don't have to stay on the phone longer, whether it's FAQ or putting in new kiosks at malls or whatever it might be to help them move through that. So really quickly, we have a starting point that we use in our methodology, and I try to really simplify it here because it's to get your brain started to think about it, but really search the data, look at the data, understand what you have in terms of data, have discussions across departments, who's got what. Great mapping. I loved seeing that mapping of here's what the different departments are sitting on and here's who's blaming who. We live that every day. Instead of looking and saying, let's blame those guys, let's say, how can we leverage it all up for opportunity for us? So, and how can we make Joe the most successful salesperson instead of Joe looking at it and saying, someone didn't deliver something for me? So we look at all the data across the departments and we look and say, what could you use right away to make an immediate impact? How do we then go put it into a model where you can use it? Again, start with 2 or 3 sources and start to anticipate what you need to do in terms of understanding either the product defects that came back why they're not selling, or what they needed to do in terms of improving the delivery model that they had. And then what we do in the piece around the machine learning, that integrative cognitive computing services, where it gets to the point where not only are we helping Joe with his data and all the other factors, but we're starting to look at Joe's personality and say, is Joe a complainer? Does Joe not really know how to solve problems? And that comes from maybe Joe's emails or his performance reviews. And you can integrate that and say, it's not to poorly rate Joe, it's to give Joe some more training and coaching, because it's harder to go find a replacement for Joe. It costs a lot more than it does to train Joe along the right facts. So one of the things that we bring into that is Joe's personality type, and the cognitive capability around that is starting to use the questions, answers, the personality traits, all pieces of predictive analytics. It is moving into what people are calling cognitive, but cognitive, again, is the mind and machine learning, which we all do through prediction as well. So expanding those concepts is how we work on individual projects. Getting started, the usual, move through the process of understanding the business problem, collecting the data, make sure it's good data. If you ETL, bad data, it becomes part of the equation of the answer. So you really have to be careful what you're using for data sources, how you're classifying that data so you can get started, how you're bringing in new data after that, so there's always a starting point. This seems to set people off path a little bit by saying, oh, I don't know where to start. Do I start with last year's data, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Do I start tomorrow's data? Put a stake in the ground, and we go from there. And then we talk about how to explore those data sets, how to move through modeling that, get the the predictive influencers, and building more complex models as we go, evaluate the insights, and go back to the process over and over again. So it's triple loop learning as you're going through this for everyone. What's the action we should do? What's the action we should do? And then when you do that action, put the results of that action back into the machine, and it helps you at the next piece as well. Best practices, again, have a strategy tied to the business and look at what are both your structured and unstructured data sources. So we have for years had analytics departments where we're doing business intelligence, data warehousing, statistics, well, you name it, and we've been using structured data. The difference in getting to the unstructured data is that you can get new and different insights. Something that was very revealing to me, and so I'm always careful now, in healthcare, we were working on a case, and it was around congestive heart failure. And I'll just give you kind of the end goal here is one of the things that happened is we found the population at risk was a completely different population once we saw the unstructured information as part of the equation. So if you're looking at just the structured information, you're finding out that, hey, we all answer the survey when we go to the doctor, whether it was 5 years ago, 3 years ago, or tomorrow. I'm underweight, I exercise all the time, I eat super healthy, and no, I don't drink or smoke, right? None of us are going to just put all that on our thing, or I used to smoke, but I don't anymore, so I'm not putting it on. And then the difference is, you go into the doctor's office, Monday morning, not I, but you, go into the doctor's office and you say, I was at a party and I drank and I smoked a cigar in celebration and for fun, and now, my lungs are hurting, I'm just dying, I've got a cold. Well, you have that conversation with the clinician and she's typing quick notes so the doctor can come in and talk to you. Those notes do not become part of the decision-making process unless you're using unstructured data. And so what's really important is to now integrate emails, conversations, images, whatever you can bring that's unstructured as well, that's part of your whole picture as a human being, and get that cognitive view of you as an employee, of you as a patient, and get the right outcomes so that the doctor can determine what is the right treatment. And so this is really interesting because the treatments differ if you're just using structured versus unstructured information. Another piece of the equation to roll into what you're using for data content to get to your predictive models. And then, of course, run through the methodologies of how you do that. And I would suggest if you're getting started, there's a lot of models, SAP, HP, IBM, everyone has methodologies and models. Small companies as well are very good partners to get you started on these projects. And what they'll tell you is, go use the big robust machines. That's not a problem, but just get started on smaller scale than you might get if you go to, IBM Global Business Services, right? And it can be very overwhelming to have, 20 people from IBM show up your house, your company, and say, now let's get started on a project, right? They don't really understand the scale you might be working with or that you want to work with. And if you're a small business partner working with them, try and bring your value prop into those projects as well. That's where the difference can be made, the agility and flexibility that can be offered there. And the larger companies support you and have great programs for those as well. So applying the technology, remember with the search and analytics tool, we have been getting the who, what, when, and where for years. And now on the predictive side, we want to start to understand the qualitative part of that, how and why. How is Joe being effective at sales, and why is he effective, or why is he not effective, and how can we get the next piece of training to him? Very quickly, and I think we're kind of running through for time, but just to go through, here's some models, and not to throw you off, but to make you comfortable with it, really, because if you start to see it and just look at it, I'm not asking you to do anything with it today. I'm asking you to think differently in terms of not being afraid to move forward and say, what can I actually do with all of the content of my information, and how do I take the text and put some tags around it? How do I do that for the simple, first 2 or 3 sources of data, and what am I going to start to see? You're going to start to see indexing, facets, and the custom facets as you go through that data. Nothing to stop a project, just something to take those process checkpoints as saying, am I seeing and doing the right thing to get the next behavior that I want? Another piece of some of the challenges could be, this might be the text. And what is the difficult here? The Latin alphabet, the abbreviations, the acronyms, the way that different words might be used, a percentage breakdown. Does EPS always mean earnings per share? Things that you need to build into the system. So one of the things we say and we recommend is that you take those first 100 instances of text or content that you're looking at, whether it's data or whether it's unstructured data, and you look at what do I need to put in there to teach the machine or to put the models together to start to build that. And it's not something that should stop you, because if you do get errors, it shows you to go back and do it again. It is an iterative process to build it out. Just another quick view to make it a little more structured for you is, here's understanding and extracting the language. Here's what happens when it goes into a paragraph or information that you've seen. And here's how it breaks down so it can start doing the analytics. It keeps it in context of how that information is shown. And again, different reports, different ways of looking through it, time series, sentiment, facet pairs, starting to aggregate all of that information together for the outcomes that you need to see to make the decisions so that you can drive your business the right way and decide, what do I do? And then afterwards, well, I did this, and this is how the behaviors happened with the employee or the product that was manufactured, whatever it might be, or the patient. This is what happened. Feed that back into the machine as part of your model going forward. It learns from that and can apply that to the next set of patients or products, whatever it might be. The cognitive services, again, starting to understand user modeling, relationship extraction, what's related to what, language identification. And so we're doing some very interesting things. One with Japan, for example, and they use different terminology, different syntax and everything. But even on top of that, where they pause in a sentence makes them either comfortable or uncomfortable. Where they raise their voice or lower their voice insinuates certain emotions and feelings. So we're starting to do the type of analysis around each individual and their conversation that we're having, and how we can predict through the level of language they're using, the terms and words that they're using. Some words invoke anger or are negative without any of us even knowing it. And so part of that is also how to use that then maybe back in messaging or marketing materials, N equals 1 type of marketing where you as the individual are the only person the company's marketing to that particular day. And then they change up maybe the letter or the promotion for those people in certain population categories depending on what they've been able to look at in the analytics. This is just to throw, everyone a curveball to say what you think is complex with predictive analytics only gets worse, only builds up all the capability as you go through and start to look at how is cognitive working, which gives it back to the machine and says, here's all the possible answers. Let's look at the evidence, eliminate it. Let's go back, get you the answers, and feed it all right back into the next set of questions and answers and hypotheses that are built. So a lot of opportunity to get started now and move into bigger, more complex models, and the companies that do that and the companies that deliver that are going to have a much bigger advantage than the others who don't. All set.